before you miss it. Oh, you're getting there. Okay. I forgot how much they fight. You just gotta let it pause for a second and then move it again. That's a good one. Oh, come on. That's a really good one. Yeah, that's a really good one.
So here we are. We finally made it to the final event of the season, the TNCBA Club Classic. At this point, where we're on the water, it's the last week of November, maybe the first few days of December. But at this point, we really don't even know what waters we'll be on for the Classic. Our club draws out of a hat to see what lake we'll be fishing, whether Boone, Watauga, or Holston. But we end up drawing Holston whenever we go to the meeting. And so these days kind of work out as a practice. But what we've got going on here is we're in the back of a creek. We got about 54, 55 degree water temperatures. And we're fishing some flats, some of the last flats, heading out of this creek. And those fish are just moving up on those flats, feeding on bait, and then moving back into deep water. So up on the flat, it's 5 to 10 foot. And then off that edge, it's 30 to 50 feet. So they have some deep water access close by. But as we go through this footage here, you'll see that we really get on a pattern with a long A and getting those fish to come up and bust on it.
This little swirl thing.
Now let's talk about our setup here for the long A. You're going to kind of see me switch back and forth between a spinning rod and a bait caster. The bait caster is much better with line twists and everything, so that's what I prefer. But what we're throwing this on, this long A, is a 5:4 to 1 gear ratio reel, a medium action cranking rod that allows those fish to come up and take that bait without you pulling it away from them. The reason for the 5:4 to 1 is because you're wanting this bait to wake across the surface. You're not wanting it to dive down under the water at all, so it makes it a lot easier to keep it up there on the surface with that 5:4 to 1. Now we did catch some fish in this first day of practice on a glide bait, but the majority of our fish came on the long A. Those fish were coming up from underneath it and just blowing up on it.
Coming in and going. Help the cause. No, he gonna help.
Here I am again up on Holston the following weekend. One, I'm up here just to enjoy that bite again. It's so much fun to have those fish coming up on that long A. And two, still continuing to practice just in case the Classic ends up being up on Holston. And one thing you're going to notice from these first few bites, these fish just weren't getting the long A as well as they were the previous weekend. I had a lot of fish jumping off, had a lot of fish that pulled off. So they were just a little bit more standoffish toward that, and you can see that it's a little bit more slick calm than it had been in the previous week, which might have a little bit to do with that. I did catch a couple more fish on the glide bait as well, but this long A was still the predominant pattern being fished on these flats adjacent to deep water. Typically, the long A is better on 45-degree banks, bluffs, but this time of year they were just really focusing in on those flats where they could push that bait up, feed on it really well, and then get back into some deep water close by. Once we made it to tournament day here, the area in the back of this creek that we've been fishing for about 3 weeks now was really starting to fizzle out. The amount of fish that we had been catching was slowly dwindling. The quality also started dwindling. We did manage to catch a 4.5 and a 3.5 early that morning. The 4.5 came on a silver buddy, and the 3.5 here on a long A. But we had to move around the flat a lot more. Those fish were kind of spread out a little bit more than they had been, and we eventually had to move off the break there into 30 or 40 foot of water and demiki some fish. You're going to see one of those demiki fish here in just a second. It didn't add to the bag, but it was just one of those changes we kind of had to make to follow those fish. Now, as we went throughout the day, the long A was still our dominant bait. That's what we caught our fish on. But we did have to move around a lot more and duplicate that bite by finding some other creeks that had flats adjacent to deep water. And we just sat there and fished over those breaks. We would sit out in about 20, 25 foot of water, throw up into those shallower areas, and that's where those fish were biting, was about where the break line was. We did catch one on a bluff, but the majority of our fish came on the long A. Now this tournament was a little bit different than the rest of our tournaments because it was actually a individual format instead of a team format, so Dad and I were kind of fishing against each other. I ended the day with 3 keepers. He had 4 keepers in the bag. His 4 fish went 13.5 pounds or thereabouts and were good enough for the win, but our best 5 together would have gone about 17.5 pounds. So another good bag, a good way to end the year. But again, the setup's key. Fishing that on a medium action crankbait rod with a 5:1 gear ratio. That way you don't overpower that bait. Again, you're slowly trying to wake it across the surface. If you get too fast with it, it's going to start to dive under with you, but you want that waking action. And one thing that we even saw throughout the lake, as those shad would come up, you would even see that V from those shad. And a couple of fish I catch right here you're seeing on the video, I saw those shad on the surface V'ing, and that's when I would reel in that long A and make the cast back there to them and picked up these 2 fish. You're going to see it here, and then on the next one I turn around and see those fish V'ing through the water, fire over to them and catch the bass that's underneath them, getting ready to chase them and bust up on them. So again, long A, 52 to 55 degrees is what you're looking for, but a killer bait here in northeast Tennessee that time of year.
Flip the net, wrap you in it, and go.
Oh, good save. Good save. Come back. I think you got 2 points.
What? Oh man.